Niccolo Machiavelli wrote, "The vulgar crowd is always taken by appearances, and the world is composed of the vulgar." He wasn't being an elitist, he was being a realist. He understood that what people see is what they believe, and the truth is often a casualty of a well-told lie. I learned this not from a book, but from the fluorescent glare of a corporate office at 2 in the morning, fueled by stale coffee and the naive belief that merit was a currency that mattered. The project was my baby. I'd conceived it, nurtured it, and spent months sacrificing my nights and weekends to bring it to life. And I wasn't alone. I had a partner, a work friend named Marcus. He was charismatic, always ready with a compliment, always eager to collaborate. He'd lean over my desk, eyes wide with admiration, and say, "Alex, you're a genius. This is going to change everything for us." And like a fool, I believed him. I believed us was a real thing. I shared everything. The strategy, the data, the private anxieties I had about its success. I saw a teammate. He saw a ladder. I confess, in those days, I was addicted to the idea of being the good guy, the one who was transparent, who shared credit, who believed in the power of the team. It's a beautiful sentiment, the kind they print on motivational posters. But in the real world, it's a liability. My idealism made me predictable. It made me a resource to be mined. Marcus didn't have to do the work. He just had to be near the work. He didn't need the ideas. He just needed to know them. He was a master of appearances, and I was just another member of the vulgar crowd, captivated by the show. They tell you that vulnerability is a strength, that being open and honest will build trust. But what happens when that trust is a one-way street? You give your blueprint to someone who has no intention of helping you build. They're just looking for the fastest way to claim the finished building as their own. We're raised on stories of heroes who win through pure hearts and noble intentions. But history is written by survivors, and survival is rarely that clean. What if the only way to protect your work, your spirit, your very future, is to learn the rules of a much darker game? What if the only way to stay kind is to become strong first? And what if that strength looks, from the outside, a lot like ruthlessness? The shift was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. Machiavelli advises a prince that if he must inflict injuries, he should do them all at once, so that the pain is short-lived and forgotten. But for sowing discord, the opposite is true. A slow, steady drip of poison goes unnoticed until the system is already failing. Marcus was a master of the slow drip. It started in meetings. He'd present one of my key findings, but preface it with, "As Alex and I were brainstorming." Suddenly, my solitary late-night breakthrough was a shared coffee break chat. He was associating himself with my success, diluting my ownership, one sentence at a time. This reminds me of the tactics used by men like Cesare Borgia, Machiavelli's primary inspiration for the prince. Borgia would arrive in a conquered city with a smile, promising peace and stability. He'd appoint a cruel lieutenant to do the dirty work of suppressing dissent, the arrests, the taxes, the punishments. Once the population was broken and resentful, Borgia would have his own lieutenant publicly and brutally executed, positioning himself as the people's savior from the very tyranny he had orchestrated. He controlled both the problem and the solution. Marcus was doing the same, on a smaller scale. He'd privately tell our manager, "Alex is brilliant, a true workhorse, but he's a bit of a lone wolf. I'm just trying to help him integrate his vision into the team framework." He was creating a problem, my supposed isolation, and positioning himself
as the indispensable solution. I started to feel a creeping sense of unease.
That cold dread that washes over you when you realize you're being outmaneuvered. Have you ever felt that? It's a particular kind of psychological horror. You see the pieces moving on the board, but if you point it out, you're the one who sounds paranoid, insecure, not a team player. This is the genius of the manipulator. They create a prison where the bars are made of social etiquette and professional pleasantries. They weaponize your own decency against you. I was trapped. If I confronted him, I would be the dramatic one starting conflict. If I stayed silent, I would be complicit in my own erasure. We are conditioned to believe in intentions, that if someone seems nice, they must be nice. But Machiavelli would laugh at such a childish notion. He taught that you must never judge a person's intentions, only their interests. What did Marcus have to gain? Everything. And what did I have to lose? The same. Crimson presentation to the executive board was scheduled for Friday. This was the finish line, the culmination of 6 months of relentless work. My work. But by Tuesday, the narrative had been cemented. This was the Marcus and Alex project. My name was still on it, but it was like a fading signature on a document now owned by someone else. The psychological pressure was immense. Every interaction felt like a chess move. Marcus would schedule meetings without me, then apologize profusely for the calendar mix-up. He would praise my technical skills to others while highlighting his own strategic oversight. It was a masterclass in quiet conquest. This dynamic isn't unique to an office. It's the same game played out in families, in politics, and in kingdoms. Think of the subtle ways a dominant family member can rewrite history over dinner, positioning themselves as the perpetual hero or martyr. Or how a politician can co-opt their opponent's policies, framing them as a more refined, more electable version of the original idea. The strategy is always the same: absorb and erase. Take the value, discard the source. The person being erased is put in an impossible position. They are forced into a choice between two forms of defeat: public confrontation, which makes them look bitter and unstable, or silent acquiescence, which guarantees their loss. What would you do in that situation? Would you stand up and scream, "That was my idea," knowing it would likely shatter your professional reputation? Or would you swallow your pride, smile through the betrayal, and hope that someone, somewhere, recognized the truth? A pensionship. I was spiraling. I spent hours rehearsing speeches in my head, imagining the moment I would finally expose him. But I knew it was a fantasy. He was more likable, more politically savvy. He had spent months building alliances and managing perceptions, while I had foolishly believed the work would speak for itself. Machiavelli warned, "He who deceives will always find those who will allow themselves to be deceived." Marcus had found his audience in our superiors, who wanted a simple, heroic story. The story of a charismatic leader who had successfully managed a difficult but talented subordinate. My truth was messy and inconvenient. His lie was clean, simple, and perfectly suited to a PowerPoint summary. By Wednesday, I knew I had to abandon any hope of a fair fight. The game was rigged, so I had to stop playing their game and start playing my own. That night, something inside me shifted. The anxiety and resentment that had been poisoning me for weeks finally cooled into a hard, clear resolve. I wasn't going to be a victim. I was going to be a strategist. I remembered one of Machiavelli's most critical lessons. A prince must be a fox to recognize traps, and a lion to
to frighten wolves. Confronting Marcus directly was the lion's move, loud, aggressive, and in my case, suicidal. He had laid a trap, and a lion would just blunder into it, roaring about injustice.
But a fox would see the trap for what it was and use the trapper's own momentum against him. On Thursday morning, less than 24 hours before the presentation, I walked over to Marcus's desk with a smile. I handed him a USB drive. "It's done," I said, projecting a sense of exhausted relief. "The final deck, the complete financial models, everything. Honestly, man, you've been the face of this thing. You should be the one to present it. You deserve the spotlight." He feigned humility, but his eyes lit up with triumph. It was the exact reaction I had anticipated. His ego was the fuel, and I had just poured gasoline on it. He took the drive, and I went back to my desk, my heart pounding not with fear, but with a terrifying, icy calm. Because the presentation I gave him was a masterpiece of deception. On the surface, it was perfect. The data was robust, the projections were optimistic, the strategy was sound. But buried deep within the financial model, on slide 34, was a single, elegant, catastrophic flaw. A miscalculation in the growth forecast, so subtle that only someone who had built the model from the ground up would ever spot it. But under the scrutiny of our CFO, a man who lived for spreadsheets, it would be a ticking time bomb. The flaw was designed to make our entire profitability projection collapse under the slightest pressure. It was a self-destruct sequence, and I had just handed the launch codes to the enemy. Marcus, blinded by his victory and confident in my work, would never think to check it. He was a thief, not an architect. He knew how to show off the building, but he had no idea how its foundation was laid. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was wait for it to spring. The boardroom was cold. The executives sat like stone figures around the mahogany table as Marcus began his presentation. He was brilliant, I had to admit. He moved through the slides with the easy confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable. He told the story I had written, used the phrases I had crafted, and accepted the nods of approval that were meant for me. I felt nothing. No anger, no resentment, just the quiet focus of a spectator waiting for the inevitable. He reached slide 34. He clicked. The flawed projection appeared on the screen. He delivered the line with a flourish, and then came the question. It was the CFO, of course. He leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "Mr. Davies," he said, his voice soft but sharp, "can you walk me through your Q4 customer acquisition cost assumption? The scaling model here seems aggressive." Silence. Marcus stared at the screen, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He tried to answer, but the numbers weren't his. He didn't understand the logic, so he couldn't defend it. He started to stammer, flipping back and forth between slides, the sweat beading on his forehead. The confidence evaporated, replaced by the raw, naked panic of a fraud being exposed. The room grew colder. The trap had sprung. After a torturous minute that felt like an hour, I spoke. "If I may," I said calmly, not looking at Marcus. "I was running some stress tests on the model last night and flagged a potential volatility in that exact variable. The core strategy is sound, but it requires a more conservative financial hedge." I walked to the front of the room, inserted a different USB drive, and pulled up a new slide. "I've prepared a contingency model that accounts for it. It adjusts the timeline slightly, but ensures profitability is protected." I didn't need to say, Marcus stole my work. I didn't need to call him a liar. I didn't need to be a lion. His own incompetence, illuminated by my quiet competence, said everything. He wasn't just a thief, he was a careless one. In that moment, he was irrelevant. I had saved the project, and in doing so, I had demonstrated a level of foresight and ownership that no one could ignore. This is the ultimate lesson from Machiavelli. True power isn't about emotional outbursts or righteous confrontations. It's about control. Control over your emotions, control over the narrative, and control over the battlefield. You don't win by playing their game of loud accusations and messy drama. You win by creating a new board where their moves lead to their own destruction. Here's how to never be played again. Stop focusing on being understood and start focusing on understanding the game. Observe interests, not words. Anticipate moves. Be the fox that recognizes the trap and let your opponent's own greed and arrogance be the thing that springs it. Was my move a cold-blooded act of manipulation? Or was it a necessary, strategic act of self-preservation in a world that doesn't play fair? Was Machiavelli right or too ruthless? Drop your take in the comments. I want to know what you think. And if this resonates with you, if you're tired of the fairy tales and ready for the truth, hit subscribe. This is the place for minds that are done being played.